Okay, good evening, everyone. Today is Wednesday, March 25th, and we're at the Planning Coordination Advisory Committee meeting under the NVTA. We'll start with who is here. We don't have a physical quorum yet, but we have Councilmember Kevin Moreau is here from Manassas. Councilmember Peterson is here from City of Fairfax. And is it Supervisor? Are you Supervisor? Yes, Supervisor LaCroix is here from Prince William. And I'm here, Linda Colbert from Town of Vienna, but we'll wait. So we only have one action item. We can wait. If someone else arrives, we can pass the minutes. The next thing we have is the 2026-2031 six-year program update evaluation results. So we'll just start there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Starla Cuso. I am not Shri Namputhiri, but I will be giving the presentation on our six-year program update. And I am driving and also talking, so please bear with me. Okay, so during our last meeting, Shri went through in great detail the project selection process. So I'm not going to go into nearly as much detail, but I did want to give a little bit of an overview once again. So there are a variety of components that go into our project selection process, starting first and foremost with eligibility. All of the projects that we receive have to be in transaction, and the project description and project location must also match the application. Then also the governing body resolution or resolutions, depending on the extent of the project, must also be submitted. So all of our applications were deemed eligible, which is great news. The second part of our selection process is our quantitative analyses. This includes the congestion reduction relative to cost, or CRRC. That measures potential congestion relief relative to a project's total cost in order to determine the regional benefit. The table that you have in front of you that I will go through in a moment, that is how the projects are currently ordered. The next quantitative analysis is our transaction project rating. So that evaluates the alignment of NVTA's long-range plan transactions, 10 performance measures. The long-term benefit analysis, or LTB, ensures that a proportionate return of transportation benefits to NVTA's member jurisdictions over a period of time. And we will walk through all of these in a little bit more detail shortly. The qualitative considerations include past performance, previous NVTA allocations. So if we have given projects funding in previous cycles, funding gaps, external funding. So if a project brings other funding sources to their application, alignment with NVTA's core values of equity, safety, and sustainability, and then geographic and modal balance, which is just our way of making sure that no one area or location is getting all of the funds. We try to make sure that it's spread out both geographically and with different modes of transportation. And then last on this list is public comment, but that is one of the most important and critical elements of our project selection process. I will be talking a little bit later about the public comment period that we will be opening up shortly in a minute, but everything you're about to see is strictly the quantitative and qualitative considerations. So this is the summary of all of the applications that we received. We received 27 applications in total, all of which were deemed eligible. You'll notice the requested NVTA funding amount totals to $1.2 billion. We do not have $1.2 billion, but that is just, again, the need in the region, which we acknowledge is very high. So again, a different way of looking at the summary of applications we received. You can see that first table shows the number of applications by jurisdiction, total project cost, requested funding amount, and then percentage of that total. The second table below that table shows the number of project applications by transportation mode. We did receive a higher number of bicycle and pedestrian projects as part of this funding cycle, which is very exciting. But again, you can see the summaries of total project cost, requested amount, and then total percentage of that request. This is another way of showing the summary. This is a more visual way of showing where the project applications are. So you can see both of these maps highlighting the different project applications that we received with some additional details about the project as well as the mode of transportation. So as I said, we're going to be walking through some of these in a little bit more detail. But first and foremost, the congestion reduction relative to cost rating. Virginia code requires that NVTA give priority to projects that achieve the greatest congestion reduction relative to cost, which is why in the table you'll see all of those projects ranked by the CRRC score. We talked through a little bit about this last month, but essentially we derive the person hours of delay reduction from individual modes and run our transportation demand model for years 2030 and then 2045. The reduction is then extrapolated between those the year of expected project completion to 2045 in order to understand the cumulative benefit. That benefit is then divided by the total project cost, which is how we get that score. So again, you can see the two columns all the way on the right show the CRRC rating as well as the CRRC rank. So now for the transaction rating, again, we use 10 performance measures that are adopted as part of our long-range transportation planning process. Those are the top colorful columns that you can see. The associated weights with each of those performance measures are that gray bar directly underneath each performance measure. So again, you can see each how the project was scored in each performance measure category. Okay, long-term benefit. So this is a previous cycle's long-term benefit, just to kind of illustrate the process. So again, Virginia code requires that over a long term, the allocation of benefit to member jurisdictions must be approximately equal to the share of revenue attributed to each of the jurisdictions. So you can see the red dot is that revenue share by each jurisdiction. Then you have a blue triangle and a yellow dot. Those are the trip-based and performance-based benefit share. So what that means is for the performance base, that is the physical location of each project. And then the trip-based is the geographic distribution of each funded project's transportation impact. Because we know that transportation doesn't stop at boundaries, people move throughout the region. So we're trying to account for that benefit that people get with those projects. So this is the current cycle of long-term benefit analyses. You can see some of these dots shifted around a little bit. That's perfectly normal. We just want to make sure that those cluster of dots is relatively close to one another. So as I mentioned, we look at a variety of qualitative measures as well. Past performance considers how effectively project sponsors use NVTA's funds. Project coordination considers if a project already has funds, NVTA funds tied to it. We look at funding gaps just to understand if there are missing pieces or a project is not fully funded. We look at other external funding, like I mentioned, other sources that they're bringing as part of this application, alignment with our core values, local priority. We also take into considerations what local priority projects staff has identified, and that is included in this table. And then you can see the kind of color gradation associated with the qualitative scoring. So the project description forms, these are the actual project descriptions which have all of the information associated with each of the applications. You have a project description of primary and secondary modes. You have project milestones. You have the project funding, when we are expecting funds to be drawn down, and then a project analysis that highlights some of the features that we just talked through, both qualitative and quantitative measures. So these are all posted on our website, so folks can look through each project individually as they so choose, if they have questions or want more information about what that project application actually is. So on our webpage, our 6-year program webpage, we have kind of a timeline of this process overall. We are at the very end of our evaluation phase, and we will start to move into our public engagement phase coming soon. But this webpage has all of the information about the 6-year program process in general, as well as specific information on each of the applications that we receive. So at a high level, this is our schedule. This is showing some of the things that we have accomplished and some of the things we still have to go through. So right now we are obviously in our March meeting, so we're reviewing the evaluation with all of our committees. We will publicly enter our engagement period April 2nd. So that is when folks will have the opportunity to give comments on specific projects. And that comment period will last until May 17th. So that from April 2nd to May 17th is our public comment period. We will be hosting a public hearing on May 14th, inviting members of the community to come in and share some of their comments or questions or concerns to the authority. In June, we hope to come back to you all and brief some of the public comments that we heard, in addition to reviewing and getting your all's endorsement on our 6-year program. And in July, we hope the authority will take action on the 6-year program. So at a very high level, that is the schedule. Be happy to pause there if there are any questions.
Anyone have a question? Councilmember Peterson, do you have a question?
Sure. So we had a very nice and helpful conversation last time about the methods here. I won't repeat that because there's a lot there, but I am curious, when you get to the stage where recommendations are formulated, we've got more than one rating system here. Will they be merged, and then will that turn into then a recommendation list that's based on the combination of these systems? Can you say, because they're sort of independent right now, which is really helpful, but it begs the issue.
So legally, we have to start with CRRC. That is the way we have to rank projects initially. So that's why we're showing it like that. All things considered, we understand that there are different ways to evaluate and measure success of each project, which is why we have a wide variety of evaluation metrics. Ultimately, we will not be combining any ratings, but we will put forward a recommendation. And that is the point where we'll take into consideration public comment. If, all things are equal, if things have a similar long-term benefit score, if they have other similar scores, we might look to other ways of distinguishing those projects to help us, fulfill the evaluation process.
And what's the total? You said 1.2 is the ask, but what's the total available? That was gonna be my question. Wow.
I believe our finance team is still finalizing those numbers. I think historically, Keith, I don't know if you have the number, but I believe
Right,
it's
yeah, we,
around.
hi, I'm Keith Jasper, for those who do not know me, I have work here on transportation planning and programming. Yeah, historically, we will get the dollar amount that's available for the 6-year program probably in May of this year. We don't come up with that number, our finance team comes up with that number, and then it kind of has to go through a review process with our finance committee, but essentially, yeah, our budgets have for next year have been approved, but we need to go through a process just to be sure what we are forecasting our revenues to be for the out years on this program, which fiscal year 2030 and 2031, and we just have to wait a little bit longer before we get those numbers. The last couple of cycles, we've seen numbers in, I want to say about the 700 million range. And there's no reason to think it will be out of that range this time. But my CEO and CFO would not thank me for giving you any more guidance than that at this stage, other than to look back at the last couple of cycles. We think it'll be similar.
Can I go back, if I just might, to the rating thing? If I understand correctly, the CRRC rating comes first in terms of its prioritization, but there's a separate transaction rating, and that is not what comes first. So we essentially have a first rating, a CRRC, which can be modified based on public input and the weighting of variables or what have you. And is that where the transaction rating comes in place that can color some of the reweighting of this, or is there some other way this gets used? Because we have two different tables, and they have two different, and they have the same list, but different positions of things on that list. And that's where I'm just trying to understand how that ends up becoming one list and what role this second table plays, this transaction table plays in that process.
Yeah, that is a good question. It's definitely an art, not an exact science. We recognize that the CRRC is one way of looking and considering projects, which is why we have other metrics like the transaction project rating, which does take into consider 10 other metrics to get that score. So again, I think it's a different way of looking at the projects and different way of thinking about what impact some of those projects don't have that are not captured in the CRRC score.
Madam Chair, may I add to that? The transaction project ratings, Starla mentioned, Virginia Code telling us that the authority has to give priority to projects that achieve the greatest congestion reduction relative to cost. But that's one piece of legislation, I think from 2013. We had another piece of legislation in 2012, which we refer to as House Bill 599, which also had direction on measures that we have to take into account in both our long-range planning process and our funding process. So we use a methodology that we use for our long-range plan. The current version was adopted by NVTA in December of 2022, and the transaction measures, weights are based on decision-making from back then. But now, instead of being applied in the long-range plan to everything in one go, we now apply them as part of our funding process to each project individually. Both our CRRC and HB 599, the transaction ratings are substantially model-based. we give the weight to congestion reduction relative to cost, because that is specifically called out in HB 2313, which was the legislation in the year 2013. But I would say that the word I would use is holistic. We have a series of quantitative analyses that we do, and a series of qualitative things we take into account, such as, in particular, past performance of projects funded by NVTA, and past performance of the project sponsors of the projects that have been previously funded by NVTA. And also public comment, which Starla mentioned, is another piece of this, which all makes it holistic. We keep the components separate for transparency. I think we would have a problem if we try to create an algorithm that merged it into a single number. We think it's much better to keep the components separate, so we can explain, to people like yourselves, members of the public, jurisdiction and agency staff, just how we come up with an holistic evaluation and recommendations based on that. So everything has a part to play, but the starting point is the order these projects are ranked in under CRRC. Whatever amount of money we have available, we just work down the list broadly until all the money is allocated to projects, and then we stop. Except that because it's a holistic process, it's possible that some projects that score relatively well with congestion reduction relative to cost may, for other reasons, be skipped or only partially funded, and projects which have a lower CRRC may get funded because they have other compelling attributes about those projects, such as, say, a low CRRC rating but a high transaction project rating. It's possible, because they're calculated differently, that it is possible to have low on one scale and high on the other scale. So that's something we'll take into account. We are very transparent about the basis for the initial staff recommendations, and then this committee and other committees will consider our recommendations and adjust as you see fit. But that is like in June. So we're really prepping you right now for what's to come, but because we do not yet have the public comment, we can't complete our analysis of the projects.
Helpful, but I am curious, the adjustments, are those made just based on staff recommendation, or are those required to be tied to either public comment or review by us or others? How does that adjustment process actually take place?
In terms of how we come up with our recommendations?
The final recommendations.
Yeah.
We have a standing set now, but I gather there's some flexibility, and I'm just wanting to get a better feel of how that flexibility is exercised to produce the final list.
We'll look at each individual project going down the list to see what we learn from public comment, what the analysis is telling us beyond the CRRC, and then we will attempt to say, these are the projects that we recommend that we consider funding, and give you the reasons why we do that. So and at the moment it's kind of hypothetical. We kind of need to see the public comment piece of it, but that's the process we will follow when the time comes. It's going to be largely driven by CRRC, working down that scale. But there may, as I say, there may be some reasons why some projects that are high in the scale will not get recommended for funding, or will not get recommended for full funding. And by the same token, there may be some projects lower down the list which don't do so well on CRRC, but Starla mentioned geographic and modal balance kind of weighs in. We need to think about how we take into account long-term benefit, which is another legal requirement on NVTA to take into account in its recommendations. So there's lots of moving parts to this, and there's no set formulaic approach. So we have to, as I say, take that holistic approach, and be transparent, and explain what that is to you. And if you're satisfied by our explanation, then hopefully you will feel you can endorse them. And if you're not satisfied by our explanation, you are more than in your rights to change them at that point. But you will be asked to make an endorsement. Only NVTA can make the decision. So they may accept what the committee say, or they may override what the committee says. I don't know. Usually it is. Usually there are not many changes to the staff recommendations at the end of the day, simply because we make the case as to why you should fund these projects. It is competitive this time, right? I mean, if based on what we funded last time, looking at the ask this time, we may barely get halfway through this list.
Any follow-up? Anything else? Okay, yes, Vice Mayor Hedrick.
I have a question that I think piggybacks off of that, though. Well, I guess as a threshold, walk me through what it looks like for a project to be recommended for not the full funding as was requested.
Yeah.
Well, first off, how much money do we have? I mean, that's got to be a factor. It isn't an evaluation criteria, but it does weigh into the recommendations. What we have found from our experience over multiple cycles is that when we fund projects that are asking us for PE, preliminary engineering, design, right-of-way acquisition, and construction, all in one go, and that we're being told what the project cost will be. We've taken, shall we say, a healthy scrutiny of how reliable a project cost is when we're being asked to fund PE. Without the PE work being done, unless there's a lot of buffer built into the planning, the project cost, then our experience has been the projects that originally came to us as fully funded, if NVTA funds the bit that we're being requested to fund, subsequently are no longer fully funded because costs have gone up, should we say. And that kind of leaves us with a bit of a problem that we in part, holistic thinking on this is, when we fund a project, and we're being told that's enough money to fund the project to completion, then that's great. But if it's not, then there's a funding gap. Who's going to fill that funding gap, and when is it going to be filled? Because generally speaking, we do not fund funding gaps on projects that we thought were fully funded, unless there is something happened to the project which was unforeseeable, or there was a project scope change which was absolutely necessary. And there's a process and precedent for doing that. But so if we see a project that's asking for both PE, preliminary engineering, and construction, then in those situations, we might say to ourselves, based on track record from the jurisdiction concerned, is whether we feel it might be more appropriate to fund just the PE in this cycle and not the construction. And that we have done in the past. That has been, I think, typically driven in situations where public comment was very divided on the project. So there may have been support, but there would have been opposition too. So if we're seeing project funding requests come to us where there's a mix of public opinion on it, and they're asking us for multiple phases, then our view in the past has been, we'll fund you through the P for whatever analysis that we've done. There seems to be some grounds for funding the project, but we're only going to fund you PE, so that as part of what you do during preliminary engineering, you work out with your community why you have a part of the community which is opposed to that project, and not just a part of the community that's supporting the project. So you can work through those differences and then perhaps come up with a different design and therefore construction costs that might suit the feedback that you're getting through the preliminary engineering. So that would be the sort of situation where we might fund early phases, but not all phases of a project. There may be other situations too.
Okay, I appreciate that. When it comes to past performance, and I know we've talked about this a little bit in past meetings, but is there any consideration or weight given to who actually is managing the project? So in some cases, VDOT might be managing the project versus the locality itself. Is there any consideration given to that?
Yes, I think there would be. I'm trying to think of how many project recommendations have been affected by past performance, in the sense that if we saw a history of really bad performance, we've said, no, you need to kind of do a bit more to clear the project pipeline before we're ready to give you more funding for new projects. I can't immediately recall that we've done that yet. But over the last couple of years, and NVTA has really given us a strong charge to address what appears to be quite a bit of project delay associated with the projects that we fund. And we've been making headroads into that, and your jurisdictional staff have been great in helping us to work through identified issues. But nonetheless, there might be situations where we feel that because of ongoing project delays, then we need to think about whether we're ready to recommend more funding on a new project from that jurisdiction. Now, that would need to take into account, to some degree, what the causes of that are and the good faith nature in trying to work through those. And we're trying to stay on top of that. Your jurisdiction, when I say your jurisdiction, I don't mean Herndon only. I think collectively across the region, we're seeing that there is a lot of attention being paid to addressing project delays and and either closing projects out early because local priorities are, say, changed, or finding other ways to work through scope issues and get us what we have an agreement with you to do. So it's very much case by case. So I wouldn't want to say here that we have some very rigid rules that we follow, but I think if and you can see this in the chart, which the multicolored chart, which has a couple of columns that are related to project performance. I mean, we're looking for like solid greens across the board. Green is good. If it's yellow, it's not bad, but it's not great either. If you're seeing kind of oranges and browns on this chart under any of the measures for projects, then that's something that gives up support. But building it into a holistic process will also need to take into account, is it very high on the CRRC ranking? Is it very low on the CRC ranking? There's a lot of things that will go into it before we make a recommendation. I think past performance is something that, you know, NVTA is asking us to pay attention to. You know, our primary measure for that, you know, within our project delivery team is, you know, what, based on information project sponsors have given to us, is the expected drawdown at any particular point in time versus the actual drawdown at any particular point in time. And the reason why that's important is because we don't tell any project sponsor what the expected drawdown should be. We measure each project against what we've been told by the project sponsors the drawdown will be. So all we're doing is holding jurisdictions to the standards that they've set to us. So if there's a wide variance between expected drawdown on a project versus actual drawdown, then that gets attention from staff. So these are the sorts of things we look at, you know, and certainly understanding the reasons for that variance is important in making the decision to recommend a project or not recommend a project.
Is there any weight associated with that on
No, there isn't. We use weights in calculating the transaction rating because there are 10 measures.
Yeah.
Yeah, this committee, not all of you were necessarily on this committee at the time we last did it. I'm sure you were. You know, we went through a process with the committee back in 2021, possibly 2022, where, you know, we asked the committee to rank the metrics and say what weight would you give to these, and you know, we did that with multiple committees. We also had public input on that, and so we did some rounding too. So you know, we don't independently come up with the weightings, but that's the only place where we put the weightings because there are 10 metrics that go into building the transaction rating. But everything else, I think, is like a standalone data point, and that's why we apply a holistic approach rather than trying to combine everything into a single number, which we think would be misleading and very dependent upon the assumptions about how you say convert one of these colored boxes, which means high, medium, or low, say, into a number, and then rolling that into CRRC and transaction ratings and so on. That would just become too meaningless, and it certainly wouldn't be transparent.
Thank you. On the going back to the conversation about the budget, you know, just looking at this, I think you said 1.2 billion is the total amount. Now, there are 3 projects that take up 60% of that. So just in a hypothetical, if those sort of get ranked top 3 on transaction or whatever, is there any consideration there for like a partial, if you can sort of knock out some of the lower hanging fruit, the smaller projects, to be able to get a larger quantity of projects, even if the qualitative scores don't rank as high?
If I can answer you hypothetically as well,
Yeah.
Yes, it depends. It obviously depends on how much funding is available, and it also depends on a data point we do not have yet, which is public comment. So you know, we've not formed any particular opinion yet on recommendations because we don't have the public comment information. But certainly, if you look at our track record, there is plenty of precedent for not funding some or not something funding some of the projects at the top of the list, or at least not funding them fully per their request, and skipping projects and going further down. You know, is one example from a couple of cycles ago where long-term benefit kicked in as something that we felt, you know, in order to stay compliant with Virginia code, we had to begin to try and refine the balance that we were seeing in terms of the long-term benefit that Starla mentioned, that is kind of being measured or calculated within the 9-member jurisdictions, the 4 counties and the 5 cities, which is what the law requires. Towns are essentially rolled into the counties for the purposes of calculating long-term benefit. Yeah, we found that there was one jurisdiction in particular which was getting way more benefit than the attribution of the revenues from that jurisdiction, and the flip side of that meant there was one jurisdiction which was getting the opposite. You know, they were getting less benefit than they should have been for the revenues that were being attributed to that jurisdiction. So in that cycle and that cycle only, there was one, the lowest ranked project from one jurisdiction, which was in excess on the benefit scale, was not recommended. One project from the other jurisdiction where they were not getting enough benefit, that the top ranked project that wasn't recommended did get recommended for funding, and so we made an adjustment on long-term benefit, and we haven't yet decided whether we need to do a long-term benefit adjustment in this cycle, but certainly the factors that made us make that recommendation previously, we still see are in play in this analysis. So we may have to consider, a recommendation which take into account long-term benefit, which may or may not be in conflict with congestion reduction relative to cost. And we are grateful that the General Assembly said give priority to and not must do, because that there is some inbuilt flexibility in the legal language there. But in any case, we had another piece of the code which said long-term benefit. Northern Virginia is the only place in Virginia where long-term benefit has to be applied. So it's something that other parts of the Commonwealth don't really relate to because they don't have to take it into account. But there's some parts of the code are not consistent with one another. It wasn't intentional or anything like that, but it does present some challenges when we come to make recommendations, when you come to consider endorsements, and when the authority has to make a decision.
On the my mind just went there as you were speaking, but when you're talking about the jurisdictional equity, for lack of a better term, is there account taken for, so for instance, Herndon close to Loudoun, and so it might be more associated, some of the benefits might be more associated with Loudoun than say somewhere out in Springfield, where a project in Springfield might be providing more benefit to folks or communities in Alexandria or Arlington than it does to anybody out in Herndon or Loudoun. Does that make sense? So even though it's within a jurisdictional bound of Fairfax, it doesn't necessarily, because geographically they're so far apart. Is my question making sense?
Yeah, and Starla touched on this. We have 2 different methods for calculating long-term benefit, and if you want to get into the weeds, I'm going to let Starla take that. But essentially, the 2 approaches we're looking at what I think you're saying, which is the benefit to a jurisdiction could be interpreted to mean for the benefit of projects in that jurisdiction, or it could be also looked differently from a modeling perspective from people who travel through that jurisdiction. We kind of, I mean, they're both looking to see, you know, how congestion reduction is being distributed. But it's just, we consider there were at least those two ways to calculate it. So we did both, because while they're not meant to be like bookends at the end of a range, they kind of are somewhat, you know, mutually validating. If we calculate it two different ways and we're getting the same broad answer, then we can have some reassurance that that's the ballpark, at least, is the right number. And it's very easy to do the calculation on the distribution of the revenues, because we track those to the penny. So we know, you know, for each of the 9 member jurisdictions, what % of our revenues is attributed to each, with a high degree of accuracy. And so we compare one with the other, you know. So share of revenues is this, the share of the benefit is this. They have to be approximately equal, the style I mentioned. So for some of the smaller jurisdictions, the difference is, you know, they're hard to even see on a graphic. When you look at the jurisdictions that are getting larger amounts of projects funded, and generating more of our revenues, or higher share of our revenues, you know, those differences are more apparent. So it's those larger differences that we're trying to smooth out. It's dynamic, it will change in every cycle, based on what we fund in that cycle. We don't control what projects go into the candidate pool in the first place. So even if we got it completely balanced in one cycle, it could be completely unbalanced in the next cycle. So we don't attempt to, you know, permanently smooth it out and balance it out, but we want to keep adjusting it so that nothing gets too high or too low. It kind of stays in a broad range. But I think for the smaller jurisdictions, it's less of a factor than it is, say, for the counties in particular, and probably the city of Alexandria is that's one of the cities with, you know, a larger amount of share of our revenues.
I really appreciate that. I think I have one more question, but I've also been monopolizing, so I apologize.
No, continue.
Going to the public comment, because that's kind of the next step in all of this. Could you just walk me through how that works with these transaction ratings? So again, allow me a hypothetical. If a lot of the public comments are, hey, we really need to prioritize issues of safety. Now, does that prioritize the safety column? Or is it if public comments come in and say, hey, I don't think you rated this project high enough on safety, and these are the reasons why. Is it possible to revise then the safety score that was given to it? Or is the answer both? Yes.
Can I answer a bit about the numbers and you answer a bit about public comment? The numbers on which this is based, the way this process works is, you all submit the application to us, we review them, we come up with a bunch of questions, we sit down with the staff fairly soon after the deadline and go through our questions with the staff, so we make sure we have got the right understanding of the project so that we can evaluate them properly. So your staff are involved in that, and that's very early on. We go off, we do our analysis, run the numbers, and we come back again one-on-one with your staff, and we explain what our analysis shows for your projects, but only for your projects. So each jurisdiction gets to discuss their own projects, but not anybody else's. And if your staff raise concerns about, we think your evaluation approach isn't taking account of this properly, this is too high, this is too low, you make the wrong assumption, then we have the opportunity to consider that, and where we agree, we'll go back and rerun those analyses for those projects. And then we bring all the numbers together, which is kind of really where we are at the moment. And then, so we've already signed off with your staff that they're good with the numbers. So any discussion about the numbers at this stage, maybe more, or maybe less about whether the numbers are right, but more about the numbers for my project are not as good as I'd like them to be have a higher certainty of getting that project funded. That's not an analytical or data issue because we've already gone through that process with the staff. So I think the chances of us changing our analysis because of public comment is very low. Because we've verified and validated the analysis with your staff already. If someone comes up with something where we say, oh, oops, we really missed that, then obviously, yes, we'll go back. That actually has never happened before. And if that did happen, we may have to do the public comment process again. This is why we try and clear all this stuff up before we go to public comment. So I don't think any of the numbers would change. But in terms of how the public comment process plays out, do you want to kind of go over that?
So after our public comment period ends, we will compile and consolidate all of the public comments we've received on each of the projects and present a summary to you all based on what we have heard. To your point, some of the public comments may address things that like safety or equity that we can't know through however we evaluated these projects. So they will be considered not within this table, but they will provide supplemental information for us in order to make better decisions about which projects we may or may not fund.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Can I add to that?
Please.
We really look to the project sponsors to advocate for their projects, right? We have one jurisdiction where when they submit a project for funding consideration, we can pretty much guarantee we're going to get like 100 comments from that jurisdiction. It's not a large jurisdiction. They work with their community to do that. We have what we call the Hillsborough playbook.
Yep.
Hillsborough, if you're familiar, or maybe if you're not familiar, is a teeny tiny town which does not rate in the top 5 towns in Northern Virginia, and so therefore does not have a seat at the table, as it were. They have to be represented by their county, Loudoun County. And in our first 6-year program, the town of Hillsborough, which has a population of 100 people, give or take 10, about half of them showed up at our public hearing. They didn't all speak at the public hearing, but they were in the room, and probably about 10 of them spoke. I guess that while every comment that we received is treated equally, whether it's testimony at a public hearing or whether it's a comment submitted through our online form or in some other way that is acceptable, I mean, you've been through this yourselves. Yeah, we make all the comments available for our members to read, but the comments they hear at the public hearing probably are the most impactful ones that they hear. So the Hillsborough playbook, is now legendary in NVTA terms because this small town, which is on Route 9, which has got a lot of traffic going through it and some pretty horrendous, kind of impacts conditions as a result of that, were successful in getting, I think it was $15 million for the project, which was what they were asking for. So I would say the authority does listen, whether that is testimony that they hear or testimony that's submitted that we summarize. It does count recommendations have been affected by public comment. So we cannot advocate for your projects until they're funded. We will advocate for your projects when we fund them, because we then consider they become our projects as well as your projects. But yeah, it's up to the project sponsors, the applicants, to decide how they want authority members, and what they want authority members to understand about their projects, the need for their projects, the level of support for their projects, anything else that authority members should take into consideration before they make a funding decision. So that date for the hearing was
May 14th.
May 14th. It is the evening of the regular authority meeting in May. It is on the front end of the regular business meeting, and it lasts as long as it will take. We'll be opening out registration for people to give testimony for that. But I would say it doesn't matter whether the comment is submitted in person at a hearing or whether it's submitted online through our established process. It gets treated the same in our analysis and summary. But you know, when you hear it with your own ears, it may be, you know, carries that little bit extra.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Anyone else at this time? Okay. Let's continue. Okay. So next we have enough people here. We could look at the summary notes of February 25th, 2025. And I just want to mention that Vice Mayor Clark Hendrick is here, and also online, Councilmember Justine Underhill is online. So is there a motion to pass the summary notes?
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Anyone opposed? All right, those pass. And next we have the NVTA update.
Ms. Patton sends her apologies. She has a long-standing appointment. She's unable to be here this evening, so I will be very brief and give what I think is the summary that she would have given. We touched very briefly, very lightly on our long-range transportation plan. We've just begun the process of updating that. This is a once every 5 years process. It will take us, you know, the rest of this year and most of next year to be completed. It will be the topic of your discussions in this fall and during the course of next year. So we'll be coming back to you at various points for guidance and feedback and to inform you of where we're at. But we did have a kickoff meeting with the consultant firm, ICF, which is Reston based, but it's an international firm. So that took place on March 12th. That was just between their team and our team. We'll be involving your staff progressively as we go through this update process. So I just want to let you know that's underway. It's going to be on your radar more in the second half of this year. Earlier today, we held the 11th annual Northern Virginia Transportation Roundtable. It was tough scheduling, I know, for any of you to be there at 8:30 this morning and then to be back here at 6:30 for this meeting. So, but we did fill this room with about 100 people. We had a great keynote. We had 4 panelists talked about various things to do with transportation technology and how that ties into transit and NVTA's initiative to look at a regional BRT system. So that was great. That was earlier today. The next authority meeting is April 9th. And as Starla has already mentioned, you know, we have the in the May meeting, we'll have the public hearing for the 6-year program. We will be taking the opportunity during the public comment period to attend a couple of events where we hope to interact with members of the community. On April 30th, the Tyson's Community Alliance is holding their annual transportation event. So we'll be participating in that along with a number of other transportation agencies, Fairfax County, DOT, VDOT, I think Northern Virginia Transportation Commission will be there. And then in May, on the 15th, is Bike to Work Day, and we have not selected where we're going to be, but we will be somewhere in Northern Virginia on Bike to Work Day, as we try to be every year. So, you know, wherever we end up, you know, for that, as well as the event at Tyson's, we'll be happy to talk about 6-year program, because we'll be in public comment mode by then. We'll also talk about transaction, talk about bus rapid transit, and anything else that you know, people participating want to talk to us about. So just want to let you know we'll be out in the community for those 2 events, and that is all I have.
Okay, thank you. Well, you are invited to Vienna because our Bicycle Advisory Commission will be set up
Okay,
on the town green, so
okay.
feel free. We'd
I'll
love
pass
to
that
have
on to
you.
the team and let them know.
Okay, thank you.
I do not make the decision.
Okay.
But thank you for the invite.
Does anyone else have anything they want to discuss or mention or ask? Okay, our next meeting is Wednesday, April 22nd at 6:30. I panicked tonight because I looked at the clock and thought, "Oh, what if tonight's a 5:30? Thank goodness it was not. So I know we have a 5:30 coming up, but I don't think it's not April.
That would be the main meeting.
It might be
but
May, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But okay, so this is your choice. We're more than happy to sit down and have this conversation with you again next month, but we will not have anything new to share next month. We will not have any public comment feedback at that point. We'll be in public comment mode, but we will not have any information that early in the process. So we'd love for you to come here that night. But if you don't feel the need, if you feel as though you've got the information you need right now, then you could give us your view as to whether or not that meeting would be worth cancelling.
Okay, any thoughts on that? I'm okay with not coming in April, but I've been doing this for a while, and I thought this was a good presentation tonight. But does anybody, what is everybody's thoughts? Do we want to cancel April's meeting? Yeah, we're good with canceling April's meeting. Okay, so we'll see each other in May at 5:30. I think that's 5:30. Let's check. I think I have it. Yes, May 27th is on my calendar at 5:30.
Yes, and I think the reason for that is we're scheduling you and the TAC on the same evening.
Okay.
I think actually that's your regular date, but an earlier time.
Okay.
Because we'll have the TAC meet at 7 o'clock that evening. So for them it's the same time, but a week later.
Okay.
But it means that we can give you both the same information regarding the public comment feedback after the public comment process has ended and we've had enough time to analyze the information.
All right, excellent. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All righty, meeting adjourned. All right. Absolutely.
How's it going? Emra, Ardenassus Park. Nice to meet you. You see you. My card. Here's your.
Yeah.
What have you done? Special